An internationally published author, Britt Elders was among the first Americans to investigate the Billy Meier case and is co-author on the first book to document Meier's contact photos, videos, and material evidence. She's also the CEO of ShirleyMacLaine.com, and she's here today on Exopolitics Today to discuss the 45th anniversary edition of UFO Contact from the Pleiades.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Well, welcome, Britt, to Exopolitics Today. Great to meet you finally.
Oh, hi, Michael. It is good to meet you finally after all these years.
Yes, it's been quite a few years since we last communicated, and the Billy Meier case is a fascinating one. I've always wanted to dive deep into it, and I worked a little bit with Wendell Stevens on the case, but I'm delighted to talk to you because you're really one of the few experts, original investigators of the case.
That's right. Yeah, Wendell is gone. My husband Lee is gone. It's just me and Tom that are still around to discuss what really went on in the early investigation. Yeah.
Right. So many people in my audience probably don't know anything about you. So, I mean, do you want to just maybe introduce yourself a little bit? I know you've written many books. You work with Shirley MacLaine. So, do you want to just say a little bit about your background?
All over the place. Yes. I consider myself a writer. I love to write. I've been writing since I was 8 years old. I am also an investigator. I just deal with nonfiction. I don't play in fiction at all. I want to learn something from everything I write. I don't care what the topic is, but I think that there is something there that we can all learn. And that's what the written word is for. So I really look at that. But my husband and I had an investigative company called Intercept, and it was designed primarily to keep Fortune 500s and financial institutions from being wiretapped and eavesdropped on. So Wendell came to us with the Meier case back in 75 and said, you got to see the photographs. We took a look at them and went, too good to be true, and just we didn't want to throw our reputation that we'd worked so hard for behind a UFO case, which at that time, back in 75, the word was taboo. You did not say, oh, I'm interested in UFOs, because everybody looked at you like you had something growing out of your head. It just wasn't real. So we said no. Wendell went to Switzerland. He came back and he really pushed. And he said, you've got to get involved with this. And I want your company behind it. And we had business in London. And we thought, well, we'll just pop over to Switzerland, debunk the whole thing within one day, and head home. Didn't happen. We were there 5 days. Meier gave us photographs, movie footage, metal samples from the skin of the craft, audio recordings, and we interviewed over a dozen witnesses. We came home shaking our head because Billy said that he was giving this to us to bring back to the States to have analyzed, to better understand that we are not the only thinking beings in the universe, which was the primary purpose of the contact. And we got started, and it was a 7-year investigation. It just literally ate up all of our time, our finances, and everything else. But every time we thought we had an answer, something else would pop up, and we'd have 50 more questions. So it was quite an experience, and one I am so really honored to have been part of.
Can you maybe talk a little bit about Lieutenant Colonel Wendell Stevens, because maybe a lot in my audience who are younger don't know about him, but he was probably among the first real major UFO researchers that investigated contactee cases.
That's right.
Many UFO researchers just focus on the lights in the skies, the nuts and bolts, but Wendell was interested in what people were experiencing in these contacts. So you want to tell us a little bit about Wendell and how you got to meet him and why you thought he was someone worth listening to.
Well, Wendell and my husband Lee had been friends for years. They had traveled in South America together. They had just remained good buddies. Wendell lived in Tucson. We lived in Phoenix. And, it was a constant communication. We were talking all the time about different things. Wendell's background was he was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. He worked on the Ptarmigan project up in Alaska. And that's where he really got interested in what was happening with UFOs, because they would have these fighter pilots come in with gun camera footage. They would get out of the plane, hand the footage to a man that would strap it to himself via a briefcase and head to Washington, D.C. And many of the pilots were reporting that UFOs were being seen all over Alaska and the area up in there. So that got Wendell really thinking, what is going on here and what's real and what's happening? He decided at that point to dig into it on his own. And he was tenacious, literally like a dog with a bone when it came to digging up things. He loved information. He loved research. He wanted to always learn more about what was going on behind the scenes. He had the largest private collection of photographs and books on UFOs I have ever seen. It was amazing. Photographs going back to the earliest pictures. There was one I remember from the 1800s that he had, one he had from China that had been smuggled out of the country that was from the turn of the century, 1900. Just tremendous amounts of photographs. He had angel hair. He went out to the scene. This is what was so great about Wendell. He would always go when he was interested and investigate. He would get on the ground, talk to the people, examine what was there. He was a good investigator, but he was trying to satisfy his own curiosity. He got into contactees because he really felt that many of the people that were having abductions in the 60s and 70s primarily, he felt were actually contactees, that they just viewed it as being abducted by something or someone. And so he wanted to know more about the experiences, what happened on the craft, what could they remember. In particular, he worked with a young man from North Carolina, I believe, or South Carolina. And this gentleman had been given metal. He had been taking photographs for several months. And finally, he saw a craft come in low and he walked towards it. And then he was taken on board. The gentleman, I'm trying not to use his name because the experience and the aftermath from many of the UFO community really made him want to not be involved with the subject at all. But we had the opportunity to really sit down and talk with him. He underwent hypnotic regression several times. He had an experience with the little grays, and that bothered him more than anything else, that they didn't look like us, and it frightened him. And yet he walked towards the craft, curious about what it was, so he opened the door to contact. And that really got Wendell looking into contactees.
So Wendell was really very focused on investigating these contactee claims, and
Yes.
he'd do the groundwork. So he traveled to Switzerland when he heard about Billy Meier's incredible contacts, and he started to find all these photographs. So I think, let's show some of the photos. I mean, the first contact apparently in Switzerland was January 28, 1975.
Yes.
So, here's one of the photos, and it's a very clear, I guess he called it a beam ship, right? I mean,
Billy called them
explain that.
beam ships because of the type of propulsion that they used. That's how they referred to them. But this particular photograph, we called the woodpile scene. We had to designate all of these different photographs with little names, nicknames, so that when we were working with scientists, we knew exactly which one they were talking about. And it was great because we could measure the distance from the camera to the log pile, from the camera to the tree line, and then in that estimate the size of the craft because we could triangulate distances. When we had it digitized, you can actually see the pixelization of the tree, of the wood pile, of the edge of the hill, and of the craft. So you can count those pixels on the edge and you can get an idea of how big it is and how far it is from the camera. This particular object was a Variation 2 craft, and it's 21 feet in diameter.
So you sent me some additional photos of these craft. Here's another one. Do you want to tell us about this one?
Yeah, that's the same one. That's a wood pile scene, only that one's flipped. That's a little bit cleaner. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. I think we have another one, and also you sent us a video of one of these craft as well. That's quite
Yeah.
interesting.
Now, this particular photograph is another video that was taken at Over Saddle Leg. There were several in a sequence that Billy took that day. And this one is another one that is very clean and clear. And when you blow the craft up, when you enlarge it, and you see just the detail in it, it's amazing. This one is really remarkable, the tree line scene, because the tree, when we were there, the big tree that's right next to the craft, was still there. And so we could get exact measurements on that. We knew how far it was from the camera. And again, we were able to triangulate and get size and distance. Again, 21 feet in diameter.
And he also had video. He took a lot of videos, and you did share one of those videos
Yes.
with me that we're just going to play now, because I mean, this is because Billy had incredible contact experiences where he was told things and met these beings, but he had this kind of evidence, photos, videos, and physical evidence as well, that he, like, even didn't he have part of the craft that he showed you?
And not part, he had little tiny pieces of metal from the skin of the craft that they had given him so that it could be taken to be analyzed. We took that, there were several specimens there, and we took it to Dr. Marcel Vogel up at IBM. Marcel, I mean, he had patents, he had worked with metals for a long, long time. He worked on other projects as well. Communicating with plants was one of his big projects. But what Marcel did was put it under a scanning electron microscope, which we were so fortunate to find him because those weren't readily available back in the 70s. And he could look at it and really see the detail in it. The interesting thing about the metal was it was a cold fusion process, is how it was put together. It was not heated and poured like happens with metal all the time. That's how we know how to form something with metal. This was metal, a crystalline structure, and then another section of metal. So all the way through, you had these crystals that were separating metals, and it was definitely just not heated and poured. It was cold fusion, which we couldn't do then. It's only been recently that we've really been able to successfully create cold fusion for metals. The other thing that was wild about the metal samples, they had thulium in them. And thulium is a rare earth element, very, very difficult to extract and very costly and very hard to find. How would a farmer in Switzerland with a 6th grade education and one arm, Billy Meier, know to get thulium? Where would he get it? And how would he incorporate it into a metal that we couldn't even make at that time here on this earth?
So it was some kind of very special alloy used for the construction of the craft.
Yeah.
So Jazz, I don't know if you have that video to play for us. Here we go. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, this video I just love because if you look at the bottom of the screen, It's about, no, not very far up off the bottom. As the craft is there, there is a car that goes through the bottom of the screen. I'm not sure this one will show it, but there's a road down there. And the craft is sitting there bouncing on what there it is, they say is the magnetic wave of the Earth. So it sort of has this bobbly effect as it's out there. And there goes this car on the road underneath it. It's a great piece of footage to really analyze, and our scientists that looked at it were quite blown away by it.
Well, it's amazing, and I mean, it really does show that he was having these interactions with these spacecraft and the beings inside them. So that takes us to the role of his contact experiences with Semjase and others. So you want to tell us about Semjase and what was her role in these Billy Meier contacts?
Well, Semjase was the primary contact that Billy had. And the contacts began with Billy sitting in his kitchen. He got a cooling sensation across his forehead. That was the best way he could describe it. And he said he got this impulse to go get on his moped and drive out into the forest. So he did. And he just followed these telepathic instructions. Oh, there's one of Jim's arts. That's great. He followed these instructions. They took him to a remote area of the forest. And he stood there wondering what he was doing there. And then he just had this strange sound that just encompassed everything. And he wondered what it was. He looked up and he saw this craft. The craft began to settle down. It hovered for a minute and then it set on the ground. And this woman, Semjase, came out from behind it. Semjase was female, blonde, fair-skinned, blue-eyed, long blonde hair, looked very, very human, just like you or me. Came walking out, introduced herself, said she was from the Pleiades, and that she had some things for him. And they began a dialogue from there. The dialogue with other Pleiadians, not with Semjase, but with other Pleiadians, continues today.
Now, I know that the contact notes were a very big part of the Billy Meier corpus of work.
Yes.
So you want to tell us a little bit about what the contact notes are and how much information is found in them?
It's fascinating because the contact notes, Billy would go to a contact, he would come back, and telepathically, he would just be given all of the discussion that they had, and he would type it out. They being he and the Pleiadians. He would type it out. So before long, they were compiling notebooks full of these things. The contact notes explained why the Pleiadians were here. Primary reason, we are not the only thinking beings on this planet. They wanted us to realize that the universe is vast. There are many life forms out there. There are many different beings that we have to be aware of, which is really important because we're talking about going to Mars and setting up places where people can live for lengthy periods of time. And then we want to go further into space, and we have to be aware that there are other individuals out there that we do need to be aware of, informed about, and we should have a desire to learn more about them. We can't do it if we think we're the only beings in the universe. So that was primary. They also wanted to talk to him about how we treat each other, how their civilization had gone through massive changes. They originated in the star system of Lyra, and they had, like we have now, warring factions. They had divisions that really tore apart their planet to the point that they had something similar to a nuclear war and they destroyed their planet. The difference was this: they had the ability to get on a ship and go to another star system and engineer, create a space where they could live and that worked for them, an environment that they could exist in. We don't have that ability. So they're very, very concerned about us. They say that they are not allowed to interfere with us yet. And yet is a very big word when it comes to that. Based on conversations with Billy, I do think if we were about to have a massive nuclear war, they would interfere. They would almost have to. They do feel like we are their little brothers and sisters. They say our forefathers were their forefathers, that they helped seed this planet, as did other civilizations, but they were here too. And so they feel related to us, and they don't want to see us go through the same dramas that they went through and the same trauma, because we don't have a way out. We have not gotten to the point where we can get in any kind of craft and escape and go engineer a new planet to live.
Now, as far as I'm aware, Billy Meier was the first one to actually reveal that the Pleiadians were descendants of these ancient Lyrans in the Lyra and Vega star systems who had gone through some cataclysmic events on their planets that led to them leaving, and there was a great exodus, and they ended up in the Pleiades and terraformed the Pleiades. So, and it's important to kind of point that out, that they terraformed the Pleiades, because I know a lot of conventional astronomers will say, well, the Pleiades are, they're hot blue stars. They're too young to actually have habitable planets.
Right.
So you want to maybe explain what Billy had to say about the Pleiades and
well, that's the Pleiadians told him that they came in and engineered a planet so they could live there. Nothing there had the proper environment for them just to settle and start a new civilization. They had to engineer it. And they are worried that we don't have that capability should we take war to the brink here. They're very concerned about that. And so they were telling him, fix it now, because you can't engineer a planet like we did. They had to go create an atmosphere. They had to literally take what they could with them and develop an entire new civilization on that planet, which they called Era. Yeah.
So the Billy Meier case, Wendell Stevens tells you about it. There's these incredible photos. And then in April of 1978, you actually traveled there with your husband, Lee.
Right.
And Wendell Stevens and one other individual. And so you want to tell us what happened during that investigation?
Yeah, that was, we expected to go in and debunk the case. We figured we'd just take a day and, just prove that it was all a hoax. That didn't happen. We ended up there 5 days. Billy gave us all of this evidence to take back and have analyzed. And so we came back shaking our heads saying, okay, now we got to find scientists. We did not have the capability to analyze this. We did not try to analyze this. We wanted to take it to the people that could really do the work with the best equipment available, the people with the alphabets behind their names. So we took it to Dr. Michael Malin at U of A in Tucson. He digitized the photographs for us so we could really examine the images closely. We worked with Jim De La Tosa. He was wonderful. He got us into laboratories all over the place. That and our connections through our company, Intercept, that was the reason we got to the laboratories we got to. And it was wonderful. But we had so many things happening. We had movie footage that was being analyzed in Japan. We had Dr. Michael Malin doing his work, Jim De La Tosa. We ended up at JPL, Scripps Institute, so many different places around the world just on the photographs. Then we had to find audio engineers that could really dig in with the equipment of the time to the sounds of the craft that Billy had given to us. And it was interesting because they really got into it. They said with all the synthesizers they could muster, they could not replicate the sounds that Billy had. We took the audio tapes to a man named Mr. Shellman at the Groton Naval Facility in Connecticut. They store all sounds there. And he ran it through their computers and he could not identify the sound. It wasn't a compilation of sounds. It was a variety of frequencies that came together as one and then spread out again. And underneath it all was the Schumann resonance, which is the Earth's resonance. So it was really fascinating to get into all of this. Then we had the metal happening up at IBM. We ended up with a piece of it at MIT being analyzed. So we were all over just trying to find the right people to analyze all of the material that we had.
Investigation in 1978 and the analysis of all the materials, the photos, all of that ended up convincing you that the Maya case was real, and so you decided to write a book. So you want to tell us about that, the first book on the Billy Meier case?
Well, the first book on the Meier case, Volume 1, was an introduction to the case, presenting the photographs in a massive way. This particular book is 10 inches by 10 inches square. It's 200 pages filled with photographs. We wanted the photographs to present in a way that people could see. It's not a little tiny 3x5, and it's not a little dot in the sky. These things actually have shape. And so that's why we wanted to do a big coffee table size book. But it has quotes from the Pleiadians. It has the background on the investigation, the initial phases of the investigation. And then Volume 2 went further into the investigation and things that were done there. So it's quite a fascinating book. It takes you on a journey over several years during the period that we were working on this case.
Yeah, and the photos in the book are stunning. I mean, and the analysis of them is very convincing. And you kind of like talk a little bit about the kind of information he gained from the Pleiadians, as you mentioned about Lyra. So it's really a great introduction to the Billy Meier case for people that want to know about him, and because I think it's always helpful to go to the very first source of information on the contact from the Pleiades, and Billy Meier really was the first.
Really, and what happens, we found on this investigation and on many others, because once you're into UFOs, you're never out. You're always curious. It does get convoluted. People tell stories, some are real, some aren't, and you lose the impact and the value of what initially took place. This is a great picture at Hassenbol. Hassenbol is it is the coldest, windiest place I think I've ever been to, and I live in snow country. So this was really something. Billy would go up there and he would set his movie camera up, and then he would take still photographs while he was taking movie footage. This particular scene was on a snowy day, and he was right on the edge of the hill. He couldn't have gotten any further, or he would have been down into a canyon. It's just such a beautiful, beautiful shot. So clear. You can see the sort of ripples around the edge of the craft, the cupola on top. The different colors in the metal actually shows up on that photograph beautifully.
Now, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but as I understand it, up until Billy Meier, the contactees, I mean, we go back to George Adamski and Howard Menger and Orfeo Angelucci and George Van Tassel. Those guys talked about meeting extraterrestrials from Venus or Saturn or Mars, always from our solar system. But Billy Meier was the first to talk about meeting these beings from the Pleiades, a star system 444 light years away. So he marked an important transition. Is that correct? Have I missed something there?
No, you are correct, but he was the first person in the modern era. I think that's important to say because throughout history we found many connections to the Pleiades where indigenous people said that they spoke with people from the Pleiades and were given specific information about agriculture or specific information about creating an observatory. So we found this to be true through myth, oral legend, oral histories in almost every indigenous culture that we researched. But Billy was the first in present day terms to really set himself outside our solar system and say, I am having conversations with a group from the Pleiades.
Now, Shirley MacLaine got to go and visit Billy Meyer at his home in 1981. So,
Yeah.
how did she get interested in the case?
Oh, this is such a funny story. Shirley called us, and somebody had given her the book. And Shirley called us, and she says, I've got to go meet Meyer. And Lee had answered the phone, and he could be rather brisk at times. And he says, look, lady, I don't care who you are. I'm not running tours to Switzerland. And he hung up the phone. So a few hours later, she called back. She says, no, let me explain. I'm writing a book called Out on a Limb. And in this book, I'm talking about contactees. And I think I have to meet this man. I think it's important. So we talked about it and we said, okay, we'll take you over. So we went over, we spent a week with she and Billy. She is a question machine, as you well know. She has an insatiable curiosity, loves to really probe and dig. And I really felt sorry for Billy because she was in his face constantly with her little micro cassette recorder, recording every word he said. And she was absolutely blown away. They became good friends. I kind of in the median between she and Billy these days, but yeah, it's a very good relationship between them.
And is that how you got to work closely with Shirley over
It
the
is
subsequent years?
actually. Yeah, we met and she and Lee hit it off beautifully. I have always liked to sort of stay in the background of things. I don't get terribly actively involved with being out front, only for this book, I think. But she and I ended up creating more of a sisterhood. We are very, very close and have been since then.
Right. So, the Pleiadians tell Billy that the planet Era in the Taygeta star system is their home. And
Right.
you mentioned that this was terraformed. So, was there anything else about the planet Era that you recall that is significant that people might need to know about
No,
it?
it had water, and that was primary. But other than that, they literally had to manufacture an atmosphere. And they couldn't have survived there without it. So this group of beings that left Lyra and went to the Pleiades created an atmosphere. They had the working elements, and that was the key that they were looking for.
Right, and I kind of recall that the Pleiades star system, that many of the stars are like 200 million years old, which many astronomers will say, well, that's not long enough for planets to form. But again,
Yeah.
these were geoformed or planetary formations.
Well, the stars were there, but the planets around them, Era in particular, had enough of the elements that they could use to manufacture an environment that they could live in. And that was what was so important to them. And that's why they chose Era.
Now, one of the other important things that's mentioned in the contact notes was the Andromeda Council, that Billy Meyer was the first to talk about the Andromeda Council. So you want to tell us what did Billy have to say about the Andromeda Council?
Well, there's a council that governs our sector of space. This says this can happen and that can't happen and things like that. it has to be run through all of these different bodies that have created the Andromeda Council. And so that was something that was important for Samyasa to tell Billy, that they had permission to visit him from the Andromeda Council. They had worked with him. All cultures coming in and visiting our Earth do. At that time, in 1975, there were 105 different civilizations visiting Earth. So that's a lot of people out there seeing things and having contact. And all of those beings that came to Earth, all of those civilizations, had authorization from the Andromeda Council to do it. But they do govern our sector of space. It's not extreme. They communicate. They talk issues through. They are not inclined to promote any form of anger or articulate you're bad or you're good, that type of thing. They want a balance, a harmony in the universe, and they work very hard to try to achieve that.
Now, as I recall, Billy said that the Pleiadians told him that the Andromeda Council mentored the Pleiadians or the Lyran colonists, that they actually helped them find the Pleiades star system to settle in. Do you recall anything about that?
Yes, that is true. But then they help these civilizations that have sort of gone by the wayside and created problems for themselves. They do step in to help them, especially when their goal is to be more in harmony with nature and with each other. Those are the two primary issues that they find of extreme value. Being in harmony with the planet you're living on, because they go mine minerals that they need on other planets that are not inhabited. So their whole goal is to try to find this balance, this harmony of life with each other and with the planet they live on.
Now, one of the really interesting concepts that is talked about in the book, in your UFO Contact from the Pleiades, is that the Pleiadians had a different concept of time, that they had an event clock as opposed to a time clock. So you want to explain that?
Well, time is our creation. Many scientists believe this as well, but the Pleiadians said time is our creation. So what they look at are events. If event A happens and event B happens, then event C will definitely happen. But if event A happens and B does not happen, event C won't happen. So it is one event triggering another, triggering another. We have the ability to change that. That is our free will and our choice to change and to make things more functional or less functional around us.
So just to kind of like maybe clarify how that works is, let's take something recent that happened that's kind of like very significant for the US and the world, and this kind of assassination attempt against Donald Trump, where at the last moment he just turned his head and the bullet missed and just clipped his ear. Now that to me would be like a significant event. It would register, I guess, in the planetary consciousness, and so that would be a time marker. And as you said, that event would be like, well, in this event he survived, and that would set and then in another event the bullet killed him, and so this would set off another series of events. So is that pretty much how it works?
That's exactly it. And you can take it backwards a little bit. Okay, there was a shooter. Trump turned his head, therefore he did not die. There was a shooter. Trump did not turn his head. He would have died. So it was that turn of the head. The shooter existed. What happened after the turn of the head or lack of turn of the head was what triggers events to happen in the future.
Now, I heard something, and I don't know if this is something you know anything about, but I heard that that a similar kind of event, of course, was the Kennedy assassination,
Right.
and that that, and of course, we know the history because he died, he was killed,
Right.
but apparently someone, I've kind of can't remember quite who it was, but they said that in another timeline, Kennedy survived the assassination,
Mm-hmm.
and that what happened afterwards was that there was disclosure of extraterrestrial life,
Wow.
and that set off a civil war in the United States that led to nuclear war with the Soviet Union and our planet. I mean
Wow.
that is pretty extreme, but that's what I recall happening. That apparently the Kennedy assassination was also one of these critical events.
Yeah. Well, I think there was another one. In fact, we were in Switzerland with Shirley when it took place, and it was the Sadat assassination, Sadat of Egypt. And we had just dropped her off at the airport, came back to the farm, walked in, and there was this huge cross on the screen. And we had heard that he had been killed, but we were told on the news that it was one assassin. And Billy says, this isn't true, they're lying. And he went in and got this big blue binder, brought it out, opened it up, found the paragraph that talked about Sadat being killed. And he says he was killed in a military parade by many people. And it wasn't until the next day that that information came out. So that was something, again, that was something that altered our future.
Now, in some of the more, I know some of the later contact notes, Billy talked about Europe and the United States descending into civil war and chaos. Again, there were certain events that would trigger that. So,
Yeah.
I mean, are we past that, or are we coming up to that?
Well, I think we're in the middle of it, really. I think we're making choices now. Do we want to respect each other for our opinions, accept each other's opinions, and try to find some middle ground, some harmony to hold us together? Or do we want to destroy ourselves? And unfortunately, I think we are at that space where we have to really take a serious look at this and not be so judgmental of everybody else, and just try to hit a place where we can hear and listen and learn from another person so we can better inform ourselves and lose that judgment and that anger and that fear that goes with judgment, so we can save ourselves and this planet. And I think that's going to be what it takes. But more and more people have to open to it.
Now, you mentioned before the interview that you still talk with Billy and you communicate. So what is he saying about events that are happening now? I mean, is he optimistic? Is he pessimistic?
Well, he says we're sort of there. We're waiting to see what happens. They, being everybody out in space, is waiting to see what we do because it is our choice. He doesn't seem terribly pessimistic, but he feels we have a lot of work to do and we still need to do it instead of ignoring it and just being angry all the time.
So he's still having contacts. Is he still writing contact notes? I mean,
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
he
there's
has
a lot of
a
material.
massive room full of contact notes. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. I really, there's so much information to dive through there. But one of the things that really interests me about his description of the Pleiadians is that they use tachyons for their hyperspace drive systems, and that they can travel the distance from the Pleiades to Earth, which is 444 light years apart,
Right.
in 7 hours.
Yes.
Do you want to explain that?
Yeah. It's actually quite simple. They say it takes 3.5 hours to exit their planetary influence. There is no time and no space, and then they enter our planetary influence, and it takes 3.5 hours to get to Earth. Well, that seemed really strange to us. So we went to Dr. John McVeigh in Scotland, who actually was researching tachyons as a form of propulsion. And he said, absolutely. He worked out all of the technical sides to it. And he says, this is possible. Could happen. Then we went to David Froning, aerospace engineer, Alan Holt with NASA, and presented the theory to them. And they said, yeah, if you're using a propulsion where time and space do not exist, then you would take so much time to actually leave and accelerate, and so much time to enter and decelerate. And it made perfect sense to them.
If you're using these kinds of tachyon hyperspace drive systems, could you actually live in the future and travel back in time to visit places like we assume that the Pleiadians are from our current space-time, but what if they're from the future? I mean, what do you know of that?
Well, they say they are at a slightly different phase of time than we are at. And they never explained that thoroughly. They just used that term. Their phasing of time is different than ours. And they are of a different vibration than ours. But Billy did talk to people from other universes that told him, yes, you can go backward and forward in time because time doesn't exist. It's our creation. So everything is happening simultaneously, all at the same time.
Now, one of the kind of very interesting, you already mentioned that the Pleiades are described in various indigenous cultures, but one of the things that I thought was very interesting in your book was that there's a reference to the Quran, and that the angel Gabriel actually came from the Pleiades and he delivered the law to the Prophet Muhammad. So I mean, that's amazing. What do you have to say to that?
Yeah, I mean, you've got that. You've got the Pleiades mentioned throughout the Bible. You've got it in the Kohiki, the Japanese religious space. It's mentioned in ancient Hebrew text. That's what I said. It's all over the place. The Pleiades really show up and talk about how they give information to Earth humans. So with them giving information to Billy, it was just another person. And since then, there have been other contactees that have come forward that have had communication, have some documentation to support that communication. And they too say that, the Pleiades have been around forever talking to people that will listen. But the key is they monitor that person for about 10 years before they initiate contact. And that's because they want to know they can communicate.
So in the Quranic tradition, Gabriel dictates all this information to the Prophet Muhammad, and of course that becomes the basis of the Quran. Now, you have Billy Meier in a kind of similar situation with him being given all of this information from Semyase and some others. But Meier was very clear from the beginning that he didn't want anything to do with a religion, that he didn't want to start it. And so you want to kind of like explain Meier's attitude on that.
Yeah, that's true. And the interesting thing about that, when we first talked to Stanton Friedman about this case, he said, I'm concerned it'll become a religion. We could understand that because it's so new and unique. The group that sprang out around Billy, they are a study group, but they're not really religion. They don't worship the Pleiades or anything like that. They want to learn. So they learn how to meditate. They read the contact notes, but it's a study group. And Billy wanted nothing to do with creating a religion. He said there have been too many religions in the past that have not told the people the truth and have harmed progress of the human. And so he didn't want anything to do with a religious type aspect to it, although a lot of people tried to attach that to it.
That the Pleiadians, when they were communicating with Billy, that they were very clear that they were just a kind of like a more highly developed form of humanity with better technology, several centuries ahead of us, but
Right.
that they were not gods, they were not to be worshipped.
Right.
So would they? I mean, I think that would be kind of like, they were very clear that they didn't want to start a religion.
They did not want that. They were concerned that that had happened before on this planet, and they didn't want any part of it.
Well, we know many examples of where you have prophets saying that they're communicating with angels,
Yes.
and then everything that they're told suddenly becomes the beginning of a new religion. So
Mhm.
yeah, we know that has happened historically. But Billy Meier, and to his credit, didn't want to have anything to do with that, and I do admire that, because the temptation to start a religion with you in the center of it, that must have been that would be tempting for some people.
It might have been, and I think it was for some people around Billy. But Billy personally wanted nothing to do with it. And we told him about midway through the investigation, if this is the area that this is going to go into, we're not interested. Billy didn't want anything to do with religion. He really felt that religions in the past have damaged civilizations, because people gave their power up without realizing they are a part of everything. The Pleiadians believe in creation rather than a single deity. They believe creation exists within all things. And so that was what Billy founded his beliefs in, that creation exists in you, me, every tree, every plant, everything, that it has that energy and is a part of it. His feeling that focusing on one or three individuals is not understanding creation to its fullest. And that's why he never wanted an association with religion.
Now, today we're at a very interesting point in our history as a planet, because the UFO issue really is getting a lot of coverage, and they're talking about the discovery of extraterrestrial life and so forth. But there are some, especially among evangelical Christians, who believe that extraterrestrials are demons. And so, yeah, you want to talk about that? I mean, how do you handle that?
Well, I think people tend to demonize things they don't know and haven't experienced. That's just the way we are. If it doesn't fall into the parameters of the little box they're comfortable with, then everything is demonic. I think it's wonderful that governments, plural, around the world are coming out and stating that these things exist and that they don't know what they are, which is what our scientists told us looking at all the evidence. We don't know what it is, but we know we can't duplicate it. Today, governments are saying we don't know what they are. That may or may not be true, but I think it's important that you hold an open mind to all things, whether or not you have had that experience. Try to learn about them. Try to expand your education about them. And if you've had the experience, hold true to it. Know that it's yours. Know that that is what happened to you. I've talked to many contactees that people have actually tried to talk them out of saying they're a contactee, because they say, oh, it couldn't have really happened. They didn't have that experience, so that really isn't a fair discussion. We're moving into a place now, and one of the reasons we wanted to re-release the books and the documentary film now is people are more receptive, curious, and open, and especially this young generation, because they're going to be the ones going into space, creating these civilizations on other worlds. They need to have an open mind. And I think the timing of releasing this information now is very valuable, not only for them, but for everyone. I think it's something people really need to examine, not just the Meyer case. There's so much information out there, as you well know, and it needs to be taken seriously, considered, learned from. And when you have an experience, have that experience and enjoy it for what it is.
Well, I did get to spend a little bit of time with Wendell Stevens. We did actually do a trip to Japan together. We got to do a tour there in Japan, and he came out to Hawaii and did one of our conferences there. So we got to talk a little bit, and he told me about the Meyer case and his involvement. And one of the things that that I remember him saying that really impressed him about the Meyer case were the predictions. That he said that the prophecies or the predictions that Meyer or the Pleiadians had this uncanny ability to be able to predict the future. And he said he had many examples of where they did this. So, yeah, do you know anything about that?
Oh, yes. The event that I just spoke of with the president of Egypt, with Sadat, was one of those predictions. Tito's death, one of those predictions. The ozone hole, one of those predictions. The reason the Sadat issue is so valuable is because Billy didn't have time to go type up a contact note and put it out there before the press was even saying he was killed in a military parade. It was already in the book. There were just so many things in there. He really got into the ozone hole and how dangerous it was and how we had to remove certain elements from our atmosphere to get it to close. It does, vary in size. It opens, it closes, but he was very concerned about that because the Pleiadians told him about that. So that was something that Jaime Maussan, a dear friend of ours and someone that went to Switzerland and investigated Meyer, he got into. He went to the polls to find out if that was true. And he was quite surprised that it was. But again, their predictions are based on their event clock. So it's, if event A happens and B happens, C is bound to happen. If A happens and B doesn't, C won't. So it goes back to that event clock on how they predict things.
Now, the intelligence community were very interested in the Meyer photos and the evidence, and Wendell Stevens told me about one of the tricks that the intelligence community had to discredit Meyer, that they would infiltrate the photo processing shops where Meyer took his photos, and they would seed the photos with some fakes, and then people would point out the fakes and use that to attack Meyer and create all this controversy. So yeah, what do you know about that? And what other games did the Intel community do?
Well, we didn't have much problem from them, actually. They, I would have to say, were quite helpful. Some of the Eastern intelligence people were not happy. That's true. And we ran into some issues there. But as far as US, that wasn't a problem.
Okay. But there were people, I think we do discuss it in the book, that people would come and take Billy Meyer's photos and evidence and say, oh, we're going to study it and investigate it, and just disappear, and it's all gone.
That's right. And a lot of it has vanished. I think sometimes we have more evidence left than Billy does.
So I highly recommend that you read this book, UFO Contact from the Pleiades, Volume 1 and 2, the 45th anniversary edition of the very first book on Billy Meier. I think it's a really great introduction, high quality photos, that details all the investigations, the people involved in the investigations, and I think the Billy Meier case is a very important one. And I'm so delighted, Britt, that you can introduce that to people who really want to know about the Billy Meier case. So I want to thank you for being on the show.
Oh, thank you, Michael. It's been a pleasure.
And I know people can go to your website, brittelders.com. Is that where people go to kind of like find out more about you, or to
Yes.
get in contact?
And about the book and to reach me, yes.
Well, thank you, Britt, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Oh, thank you, Michael. I'll see you soon.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.